As day gave way to night on a cold October evening in 1971, Una Lynskey stepped off a bus on the Ferryhouse Road in County Meath. The walk down Porterstown Lane would usually take her no more than 15 minutes, but on that dark and damp evening, Una never made it home. What happened next caused deep and long-lasting division in an otherwise tight-knit community, with the impact still being felt over 50 years later. At the heart of it all, however, is the unsolved murder of a 19-year-old girl.
Welcome to the first episode of So Much Crime, So Little Time. Join us as we start with the still unsolved murder of Una Lynskey.
Hi, I'm Dee, a true crime enthusiast. Everything from podcasts to books, any crime, I'm into it.
And my name is Jeff. I am a true crime novice, although I'm getting into it more thanks to Dee. In this episode, we'll explain what this podcast is. We'll also do our first preview. We'll look at Inside the Crime Season 3, the Una Lynskey murder. We'll also discuss a true crime question of the episode. So who is this show for? It's for true crime lovers, people hungry to discover more true crime stories, people who want to continue the discussion about their favorite true crime stories, and maybe people looking to start a life of crime. Wait, no, probably not that one.
Have you ever listened to a podcast and wished you had stopped after episode 1? Well, our aim is to give you enough information about a podcast so that you know if you should keep listening, or whether it may be a no for you. If, after listening to our preview, you decide that our true crime story is not for you, skip straight to our full review episode. There you can get a detailed summary with our thoughts on the show and have a chance to hear the interesting and not so interesting elements of the story, without wasting hours of your time listening to the full thing. On the other hand, if upon hearing our preview episode you decide, yes, this true crime podcast is for me, what a great recommendation, go ahead and listen to it all. Then, once you've finished, when you are dying to discuss the things you liked, disliked, the shocking twists, the obvious blunders, you can listen to our full review. You'll get to hear our thoughts on the intricacies or stupidity of the crime, along with our opinions on the format of the podcasts and any holes in the story or the production. Think of these episodes as a book club, but for podcasts.
So how is it structured? There's previews. This is where you can discover new true crime stories. You can decide if it's worth your time, hence the title, and we'll do no spoilers past episode 1 of a show. So that's what this one is.
Then the full recaps, you'll hear discussions on the show as a whole. We'll pick apart the story. We'll also talk about the show itself. Did they nail it? And you can share your comments here too.
We're also going to have discussions and questions beyond the main feature. So we'll discuss broader issues related to true crime. We'll also answer your questions. Unless it's how to get away with murder, that we won't do.
What will you get from it? You'll get recommendations on the best in true crime. While our focus is podcasts, we'll also discuss true crime movies, TV shows, books, and other media. This is a place to hear discussions after you listen. It's like a book club, but for podcasts. Okay, so today we're going to be looking into Inside the Crime, Season 3. So this debuted in January 2024 and it's hosted by Frank Graney of Newstalk, which is an independent radio station that broadcasts in Ireland. There's 5 episodes in all and they range from about 30 to 45 minutes each.
So let's go over what's in the story. One thing I want to say before we get into the story is just to make it clear that we're talking about Season 3. We learned that the hard way. There are multiple seasons of Inside the Crime, and this is the one that's about Una Lynskey. It's the only one so far about Una Lynskey. So the first episode, we're just going to do a quick recap of what happens in that episode. So we get the setting. It's this Porterstown Lane in County Meath, Ireland. That's about...
Oh, whoa.
What? What?
County what?
County Meath. Isn't that what it's called?
No.
What is it called?
County Mead. Mead.
It's a TH.
It's Mead.
All right. Is Porterstown Lane correct?
Porterstown Lane is correct. Yeah.
Ireland. That's all right.
Well, I mean, Ireland is not correct.
Okay.
Ireland.
And
New
where is
York?
that? That's
Sorry.
outside Dublin, right?
Yeah. It's just
Okay.
outside Dublin. So it's a county right beside Dublin.
All right.
Loads of people live in Meath and commute to Dublin for work, to give you
Right.
an idea. Sorry.
Have you been to County Meath?
Oh, yeah, of course. Of course.
In 1971, which is when this podcast
I
is
wasn't
set,
there in 1971.
You weren't there?
I
Okay.
wasn't born yet. You might have been, but I was not.
Wow. All right. At the time, this was farm country. Is it still farm country, or has it been built up?
It's like a mix.
Okay. County Meath, Ireland.
Meath.
Porterstown Lane. That's
Meath.
where we are.
Yeah.
It's 1971.
Yeah.
All right.
Sorry.
We're going to get through this.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I can't believe we'd never discussed that before.
Well, no time like now. I'm working on my Irish pronunciations. They're real bad. Okay, so this story centers around Una Lynskey. She was 19 years old at the time. She was the fifth oldest of 12 children, which is something I want to talk about later. We'll get back to that. And in the first episode, we really just meet a bunch of locals. There's a lot of interviews with family members and neighbors of Una. There's a fair amount of time talking about how peaceful the town was. Things like, people kept their doors unlocked, very quiet, kind of typical true crime podcast setting. And then we get into more about Una. So we learn that when she was 1971, she had her first boyfriend, Paddy Kelly. How's that? How am I doing on pronunciation?
I mean, if you got that wrong.
All right. So there had been some drama with her family about her boyfriend. Her parents felt like Paddy was beneath her. There were some rumors that she was planning to run off to Dublin with him. And there's also this little bit, the night before the crime happened, she had been to the doctor. We don't really know what was going on there, but things were definitely tense with her parents. There was also some friction with her boyfriend that we don't really know the details of. Maybe they were going to break up. We're not really sure. But anyway, so she had a job. Una had a job that she took the bus to and from. And she always came home on the same bus and walked about 10 minutes from the bus stop to her home. And so we're talking about Tuesday, October 12th, 1971. So that was the day she came home on the bus, but then never made it home, that 10-minute walk. So we hear all of that, and then we get to the beginning pieces of the investigation. So there's a bunch of people who saw different things or heard different things. The most notable ones, there were some different reports of a large Ford Zephyr or Zodiac. These are two cars that I had never heard of before, but I looked them up, and they're pretty cool looking 60s, 70s cars. Also, several people heard screams, different variations of this, but I think the most notable one was someone reported hearing 3 screams. The first was very loud and long, and then the others were quieter, fading into the night, which is fairly ominous. There's also a witness who saw a girl in the back of a large Ford car that was being driven at speed away from Porterstown Lane. There were 2 men in the car, and one of them was trying to kiss the girl, and the girl looked frightened. So that seems also fairly ominous. But the episode then ends really kind of abruptly right after all of this. So the investigation is really just starting. We're still on that night, October 12th, 1971. And that's the end of the episode. So that's the first episode of Inside the Crime. All right, Dee, what do we think? What do we make of this?
Okay, initial thoughts were there was so much detail. It really set the scene. Like, I could really picture it. Like, everything about it just felt like really well done. There were a lot of details. There seemed to be a lot of things that you were teeing up to be like the main thread of the story going forward, which I thought was interesting. Like, a lot of details about the relationship, and like how, it wasn't smooth sailing in that relationship. So yeah, it was interesting things. There was also some really bizarre things, like, there was that, as you mentioned, like, it was reported that there was a girl who was frightened in the back of a car being driven by a man, and she was trying to be kissed by another man, and like the screams, and people are saying, oh, it's probably a rabbit caught by a fox. And to me, I'm like, what? Like, if someone looks frightened in the back of the car and someone's trying to kiss her, maybe you should do something. And like, if you're hearing screams, maybe you should do something. But it's the 70s in like a really quiet area in Ireland. Like people aren't assuming that if you see this, there's something wrong. Like even for a girl trying to be kissed in the back of the car, like definitely in the 70s, it would have been the case that you keep your nose out of anyone else's business. So there was interesting and bizarre things happening, but it really got me. Like,
do you think it was clear? So there were the people who heard the screams. There were the people who saw the car, people who reported seeing a strange car. And then I think it was just one person who saw the girl trying to be kissed in the car. These maybe weren't all the same people. Was that clear?
Yeah, I think it was fairly clear that it wasn't all the same people, but I think what's hard to, I don't want to get into too much of like the full like recap of the episode, but like what it's hard to do is to take our brains off of everyone knowing everything so quickly. So if someone 200 meters down the road hears someone scream and someone else sees a girl like looking like she's being kissed in the back of a car, like those two things might not mesh together so well. I do know like that her cousin Pádraig Gahan was a witness, and he saw the car, but he didn't mention seeing the girl in the back of the car trying to be kissed. But then he also saw the screams. So someone else saw the girl in the back of the car trying to be kissed, but maybe didn't hear the screams. So there's like all of this information going around, and you don't have what we have now, which is where information gets spread so quickly through like social media or smartphones or like even just like a mobile phone. So in a way, when I was hearing those things, I was like, someone do something. Like we have all this information, but like you have to remember that it's a different time. It was a slower pace of flow of information at the time.
I think that's a hard thing to maybe appreciate, is that, yeah, if you don't go and talk to somebody, particularly here, it's not like they're even calling each other on the phone, right? Like this is farm country, this is rural. Until you run into someone or it gets spread kind of person to person, like you don't know all the different things that are going on. There's no next door that is sharing information.
Yeah, and in saying that now, like within an hour, they were out searching for her, which is something that I think we'll come back to later. But like, you know, in all of the things I've ever listened to, like it's the speed that the search begins and where you have like an area that you know you should search, like they're like pivotal, you know, things within any like mystery or kidnapping. So they were on it. People were on it straight away. Like her parents were on it within about 25 minutes of her leaving the bus stop. So maybe even 15 minutes of her actually being...
I actually thought that jumped out at me, that her parents, right. So she normally took the same bus home. She would have that 10-minute walk home. And yeah, it was within 20 or so minutes of her not showing up that they were out organizing a search party. And then, yeah, the police were there within the hour, I think. Yeah, that was really fast. Especially, like, and I want to talk about this for a second. I think, okay, so Una was the fifth eldest of 12 children. Yeah. And then next door to her was her uncle, and they had 11 kids. So that's 23 children.
Yep.
in 2 households next to each other.
Yep.
And then, 4 parents. So...
How are they keeping count? How do they know that she wasn't back yet?
I mean, seriously, like I feel like that's notable, right?
I mean, well, it is. Like I had 4 older brothers, and there was definitely a few times where there was head counts going on, being like, who was here? So yeah.
I don't really have a frame of reference for that. I feel like when I was younger, like before cell phones, I had a friend who was the youngest, or somewhere near the youngest of like 5 or 6, and I feel like by that point the parents had no idea where anyone was at any time.
Yeah.
Just like, does this person even one of my kids, or are they just like a stranger coming through? I don't know their names, don't know their birthdays.
Yeah, it was an interesting one. You'd wonder like the reason behind like them noticing, like maybe she had, I'm completely guessing now, but if likely it was like old school Catholic vibes going on. She has her job, but maybe she has her own chores back in the house that she's expected to do. Like there's talk of her dad on the farm, working on the farm even that night when the search is happening. So like maybe she was due to, I don't know, take the milk in from the cows or something, and it wasn't being done, and that's maybe what was like so obvious or so clear.
Well, there was also this friction where they thought that she was going to run away.
Oh, that's a good point.
Right.
Yeah. So maybe it's got nothing to do with the cows.
Well, maybe. I mean, there's always cows.
There is always cows.
But but the parents maybe were on high alert that like they were already sort of fighting with her. They were worried she wasn't going to come back. So when she doesn't show up at the time she always shows up.
Yeah, and that would make more sense, especially given the fact that the sister wasn't worried at all. She was like, she's fine. Like, she's either like run away or like she'll be back. Like, I'm not worried. So, yeah. Come here. How eager are you to keep listening to it? Like, did it like grip you enough to be like, I want to keep listening?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things I liked about it was it's a well-told story. I think there's a lot of first-person accounts. Like, for a story that's 50 years old, I feel like there was a lot of access to people who were there, people who were very closely involved. I think that's hard to do for something that happened so long ago.
Harder to do likely in America, because in Ireland, I think, especially like rural Ireland, like it's, especially at that time, like even the brothers living right beside each other, and you hear from a lot of them who are still living close to the lane. So like the people you're looking for are all still there. They're still very much in the community, which is possibly harder in America, or I shouldn't say in America, really. I should say my experience so far in California, which is people are moving the whole time. Like, it's less like where we are.
Yeah, I guess that's, I mean, yeah, I mean, that's fair. I think that's maybe true in other places I've lived in America, where there's more people who've just sort of through generations stayed in the same place, which isn't as true. Definitely not in California or in like the Bay Area, California, especially, where there's a lot of people kind of coming and going all the time. But what about you? Where do you stand in terms of like hearing this and then wanting to go on to more?
Yeah, like I was enthralled. This was a total me podcast, like through and through. Like, first off, like, it's an Irish podcast, and being here, especially since moving here, there's always something incredibly homey about like listening to some Irish accents, even though like I'm aware that they're not like talking about something nice, but like it's still, it's still kind of nice. I always enjoy that. And then the other thing that I found interesting was there's so many stories in Ireland about women who've gone missing and who've never been found. Like, there's so many names that you hear about, like Jojo Dollard. Like, you hear about all these names throughout my life. I've always been surrounded by them. Deirdre Jacob. There's like a myriad of names of women and girls who've been taken. And I had never heard Una Lynskey's name. And that like piqued my interest, because I was like, well, this means she's going to be found, or this means that, like, I was trying to figure out, like, why have I never heard her name?
Do you know why that is?
No.
Yeah, that's interesting. What those other women you mentioned, like, so these are women who just disappeared and were never found.
Yeah, there's like a variety. We could have a whole podcast on them. There's a variety of stories of. It all goes back to, and I think this might be the other reason why I was intrigued in this story, and like the reason I find maybe crime so interesting, like, because I've heard about these women for so many times, but like, this is basically at the end of the day a story about a woman who's going missing when she's so close to home. She's so close to her safe place, and somebody has come in and, taken advantage of the vulnerability of a woman walking alone or running alone, right, which happens so often. And all of the cases, the Jojo Dollard, the Deirdre Jacob, Reynard Murphy, like, she was or Reynard Murray, sorry, I think I got that name wrong. They're just vulnerable women. They think they're safe. They think they're able to walk this few hundred yards to their house, and they don't get there. And this has always been something that resonated with me. So like, as I've said, I have 4 older brothers. I was always aware how differently I was treated about getting home than my brothers were. Like, my mum was never like, my mum was overly, get the taxi to the door. I didn't hear the taxi outside the door. Did you walk from the gap up the road? Did you not get dropped to the door? Like, call me if you've to get the bus home and I'll walk out to meet you. Like always on at me, because she knew my vulnerability as a woman, which was so frustrating, obviously. But unfortunately...
How was that frustrating? Because it was different treatment than your brother?
Yeah, like as growing up, you're just saying, I'm fine. Like I can take care of myself. Like, you know, and my brothers were not given this. Like they could cycle home. I was like, why can't I cycle home? And my mum was like, you're not cycling home on your own. And like,
why
it's not as if we grew up in a ridiculously dangerous area. Like we were in a nice suburb of Dublin. So.
Well, okay, but so this also is maybe not quite a suburb of Dublin. It's a little further out, right?
Yeah.
This is more rural.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, this was 1971. Would this have been? I mean, would your parents have been aware of this? Do you think? I mean, you'd never heard of this case
I'd never
before.
heard of it. No, I actually didn't ask my parents. I should ask them if they had heard about this case. I'm sure they would have become aware of it, but like, given that I don't know about it, again, it goes with the media not having like. I feel like if someone goes missing, you hear about it so quickly these days because of that like spread of information. It's so quick, whereas I'm unsure whether they would have been aware of this at the time.
Can we jump back to something you said earlier?
Yeah.
When you talked about how you like this because it kind of reminds you of home, or like it's familiar, the Irish accents, even though it's about something very dark.
Yeah.
There are I know this is a true crime podcast that we're doing here, but there are Irish podcasts that aren't about women getting
no, and I
abducted,
listen to
right?
them.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I love like I've some favorite podcasts of mine are like very like on the comedy side of things, but true crime is my thing. It always has been, or crime in general has always been the thing that I've been most interested in, and I suppose that's one of the factors as to why I wanted to keep listening to this one over like there's so many true crime podcasts out there.
Right.
So many different stories, and some you get caught in and some you don't. So definitely the Irish accents was a factor of keeping me in there.
Do you think for people who are looking for a point of reference other than the fact that it's Irish, like does this compare to anything else you've heard in like the format or the story? Like is it familiar?
I don't know. It didn't strike me that the format was terribly different to any of the other true crime formats. Inside the Crime in general seems to take a little bit of a slant at some point towards like the legal system in Ireland and how the legal system works, which I find interesting again because I'm Irish, but we'll discuss that in a later episode. But I don't know that the format, I don't know, it's kind of the same as the other ones, no? What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm still kind of relatively new to this structure. It felt kind of like a classic format in terms of, you know, the first episode really kind of sets the scene. We learn a little bit about the crime. I feel like it's unusual in that we get to the end of the first episode. We still don't really know what happened. We just know she disappeared. There is a note at the end. I think it's noted in the beginning, but it's definitely at the end about how they're still looking for tips and that this is an open case and it is an unsolved case. So I think that's it's an interesting thing to put out there right at the beginning. So like, you know, and I wonder for people who maybe find that maybe more interesting because it is like a mystery that is still out there to be solved. I imagine there's probably some people who that's more maybe a warning, like, know that this isn't going to have a resolution necessarily. I think it'll have a resolution of its own kind, but not like there is a mystery that is and a crime that is yet to be solved, even though it's 50 years ago.
Yeah, and I did wonder about that. It's definitely something I wanted to look into because, like, why did they say that? Like, is that like because it's related to news talk, like a broadcasting station? Did they legally have to say like we're still looking for information? Come and give it to us? Or like if it was its own like standalone podcast, would they not have had to do that? I'm not sure. We should look into that for the next episode. In terms of like, yeah, I agree with you. I think that's interesting, and I don't know how people would feel about it. It kind of like, it would generally not be my vibe. I wouldn't be into listening to like 5 or 6 episodes and realizing it's still open. But like, even so, I loved this. I thought it was well worth a listen, and like, yeah, it got me from the get-go. Like,
Yeah, I hear. I think that it's only what is it, 5 total
mm-hmm.
episodes, and they're each like 30 to 45
Yeah,
minutes long.
it's
Like
doable.
I have listened to other ones that are like 10 episodes or they're longer episodes, and there isn't a resolution at the end, and I feel like that's
feel a
more
bit
unsatisfying.
cheated. Yeah.
Yeah, this one is not a huge time investment, which I think
Mm.
works in its favor. Like, you can get through this in an afternoon if you just listen to it straight through.
Yeah. I do think like the edge that this series has on, say, other like stories would be, it's the focus is like on the impact of the crime, not just on like the crime itself. And it's like the impact not just on the victim's family, but on the suspects, on their family, on the entire community, and like how it kind of changed how the community functioned, like fundamentally, even from the locking of doors.
Right.
So I thought that was an interesting edge, like an interesting like focus, but I don't think it was like a revolutionary, like like totally different like view of the crime. But I thought it was an interesting lens to look at it through.
So, all right, we should probably move on. I feel like we both
Yeah.
agree that this is a podcast worth
It's hard
listening
not to
to.
like give too much away. I feel like a few things I said need to be like, ugh, like, but anyway.
Well, I mean, it is alluded to in this episode that it's going to be about more than just this one case. So we'll cover that more in our next episode. I do, before we move on, want to ask about a couple of Irishisms that I didn't understand. And then maybe this bit on a little bit of a lighter note. Okay, so I have 3 different things. One of them is there's a line that says something like, it's referring to the geography, and it says from east to west or top to bottom, as the locals would say.
Like, nobody uses east to west in Ireland.
What does top to bottom mean?
It's just the top of the road.
But what does that have to do with east or west? Like, is that a direction, or is it
No,
referring
like,
just like
you'll know if you're there if it's the top or the bottom. Like, the local will tell you if it's which is the top. Like, if you go to Dublin City and you go to Grafton Street, which is like the main, one of the main like streets that you'd visit if you were there, people would talk about the top of Grafton Street and the bottom of Grafton Street. Now, Grafton Street is flat. Like, there's no top or bottom, but like that's just how we refer to it. We don't have blocks. We're not like as like organized as this country because we're old. Like, it's a more historic country, and so you never go east to west. No.
All right, I don't know that top to bottom makes it any clearer, but okay, I'm with you on that.
It does when you're there.
Okay. All right. The second one, there's a reference to Una and her boyfriend going to the pub for a drink and a sing-song.
Yeah.
I get what a drink is.
Do you not get what a sing-song is?
I mean, is it literally just people singing at a bar, or is it more?
Yeah. But like it is basically, in a nutshell, it's people singing at a bar. There might be a fiddle or like a banjo or something brought out, and people will have a bit of a sing-song.
I don't feel like this.
No,
this is not happening in America. I mean, it's karaoke.
Yeah, it's not karaoke. It's like kind of more like traditional Irish songs kind of would be the singing. But like, and also the reason it doesn't happen in America, which is a side note to this episode, because you have TV screens everywhere. Like, there's no room for a sing song. You don't have a big TV screen in pubs in Ireland. Like, there's no pub culture here where you go into a nice pub. There's no screens. You're just there for a chat. There might be a screen brought down maybe in some pubs if there's like a big match on. But like here, the TVs are on regardless. Like at all times. And there's like 20 of them, even in restaurants. It's wild.
It's a sweeping judgment going on about Americans just watching TV no matter where they go. It's not wrong. I don't think it's inaccurate.
I'm not saying that about Americans, because a lot of people in America that I met like go out hiking. They enjoy things that aren't TV. But when you go into bars or pubs or restaurants here, it's so notable how many TV screens there are. We just don't have that in Ireland. So maybe that's why sing-songs happened. It's part of the Irish culture. It's how like stories were told throughout the generations. It was through song.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. I kind of figured that one, but it is an interesting one. Okay, and then the last one. So while Una is going missing, it starts to rain, and her father goes outside to move a load of potatoes into a shed to keep them dry.
Talk about like going with the most stereotypical thing is like potatoes had to be mentioned in the Irish podcast.
I mean, that felt a little shoehorned in, but I'm just curious, like, doesn't it rain all the time there? Like, why are there potatoes just out?
I don't know. Maybe it was a very dry week. I don't know much about potato farming now myself.
Okay. All right.
But I presume if they get wet, it's not a good thing.
Potato farming isn't like a part of the elementary school curriculum that everyone goes through. Okay.
Potato famine is, but we won't talk about that one.
Right. All right. That's something different. Okay. All right. We should move on. All right. So that is our recap. So we will come back next time and do a full review of the whole season 3 of Inside the Crime.
Yep. Jeff, how did you get into true crime in the first place?
I mean, I kind of want to hear your answer first. I mean, I can talk about mine, but I feel like you're more the expert here. So I'm curious about your story.
Yeah, kind of hard to say crime without the true part of it. Crime was like a big part of my upbringing.
Wait, hold on now.
That sounds really bad.
You want to say that again?
Okay, what I'm trying to say is that like while my friends were watching music videos on MTV, I was watching Murder, She Wrote, CSI, or anything else that had a dead body and a question mark over everyone around. That's just the way I was. My mum, like, we constantly watched crime dramas together. Same with my brother, like Murder, She Wrote, Columbo, Frost, Inspector Morse, Silent Witness, everything that like had some element of crime, often murder in it. And then like with true crime, I think it's just like it's the mysteries, it's the like the questions, it's the unknown, like the case of Madeleine McCann. I remember that so well when that happened, like when she
what
went
is that
missing.
Story?
Madeleine McCann, the 4-year-old girl who went missing on a holiday in Portugal. Blonde haired, blue-eyed cherub of a girl. We should do an episode on it. It's okay. There's lots of different mediums that cover it. I'm sure there's a podcast about it. There's definitely a TV show about it. It's an incredible case, and she's never been found. She had a very distinctive anyway. So the stories like Madeleine McCann, and then I mentioned earlier about all the Irish women we had heard of, like who had gone missing in Ireland. Like there's just so many question marks over this, and like so many question marks over crime in general and the psychology behind it, like why people commit crimes and like why they happen, how people get away with them, like how there's so many mysteries left. Yeah. So I'm just a crime junkie.
That makes sense. I mean, when you put it that way, I guess I was thinking in terms of true crime, like, I mean, you're bringing in things like Murder, She Wrote, where it's the same basic story, but through a fiction platform.
I'm singing the theme tune in my head now.
The theme to Murder, She Wrote. Yeah. I was actually thinking about this in terms of like when I was like a teenager or like a kid, and how like that was a time before, well, I guess the internet existed, but it was still relatively new, and things like the O.J. Simpson trial or like Tanya Harding or like some of these stories were just like I didn't care about figure skating, but you couldn't escape the Tanya Harding story. Like it was just everywhere. The O.J. Simpson thing, right? Like I was in, I think, middle school when that happened, and like they announced the verdict to the school over the PA. Like that was, and like wild. It was a bizarre moment of like we're all just sort of consumed by this, and that like we weren't in California then, I was in New York, but it was, I mean, the whole, I don't know, at least where my world was everyone was obsessed with it, and
in Ireland too. I remember it.
Was it?
I remember the trial. I don't think I quite understood what was happening, but I remember it like being shown on like the television, or snippets of it being shown on like the 9:00 news.
Right, and it was super grisly, right? Like, I mean, this was a couple of people getting brutally murdered by allegedly, a movie star, right? A football star. And that was, I mean, it was such an unusual thing. But yeah, but then like in terms of podcasts, I mean, I listened to Serial when it came out the first season.
It was my first ever podcast I ever listened to, was Serial season 1. I didn't know what a podcast was before that, and I listened to it. And I think that's the case for so many people. They listen to it and they're just so drawn to the story and to how it's like laid out.
So if that was the first podcast you listened to, I mean, did that then serve as like a gateway to more true crime podcasts immediately?
Yes.
Yeah. See, it's interesting because I went a different way, and I was like, this was a super captivating story. I want to listen to podcasts about comedy or politics.
I find comedy hard because I find it hard to listen to a comedy podcast that I don't feel is forced.
That's interesting. But you like listening to ones about women getting abducted and murdered?
Not just women.
Disproportionately, it seems like that's what these are.
Well, I think, is that just disproportionately it's the women that are being murdered?
Yeah, maybe.
Or that maybe the stories are being reported on because there's elements that are more interesting. I don't know.
All right. Well, we'll get more into questions like that in the future.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's it for us. Thank you for listening. In our next episode, we're going to be discussing the whole of season 3 of Inside the Crime, Una Lynskey. It'll take a lot of unexpected turns.
Yeah, and there's going to be some challenging accents. We'll talk about that.
Challenging for some.
Challenging for me. They're challenging accents for me. So Much Crime, So Little Time is a production of Mind Glove Media. The executive producer is Paxi Caloriso. Our associate producer is Blythe Tide. Our theme music was composed by Vyacheslav Starostin. If you haven't done it yet, please subscribe to the show on your podcast app. And don't forget to give us a 5-star rating and a review. Even better, tell your friends. To join the discussion, look for us on social media. Check out the show notes for all the links. Thanks for listening.